So U.S. President Joe Biden says he's made a decision on how to respond to an attack by Iranian-backed militants that killed 3 American troops in the Middle East, although he did not reveal his plans as he spoke to reporters yesterday.
Do hold them responsible in the sense that they're supplying the weapons to the people who did it. I don't think we need a wider war in the Middle East. That's not what I'm looking for.
Well, joining us now, Tina Fordham, geopolitical strategist and founder of Fordham Global, Foresight, and Leslie Vinjamuri, director of the U.S. and Americas program at Chatham House. I've been looking forward to this panel, frankly, for the last week to try and make some sense of exactly what we're living through. Tina, when you look at the big geopolitics, so thank you both, first of all, for joining us. When you look at some of the big geopolitics and really, the concern that Joe Biden has to calibrate his response, maybe to send a message, but not go too hard or this escalates. Is this your main worry right now?
It's the biggest short-term worry for markets, certainly, and for the Biden administration. I mean, Joe Biden is between a rock and a hard place. The lack of market reaction is kind of out of kilter with the fact that this is the biggest attack and the only attack killing U.S. troops in quite some time. So Biden does need to respond. General Stavridis said as much. He needs to hit back hard, but without triggering a full-scale confrontation with Iran.
Leslie, I mean, the concern, and I've heard both sides, right? So, some people saying, well, look, the U.S. has to go harder. They have to be more engaged in foreign policy, which is hard probably in an election year. But also I've heard that the U.S. can't really handle, their involvement in Ukraine, their involvement in the Middle East, or just trying to do too much.
Well, I think that there's a general concern to bring the level down, to introduce some stability. And so it's less a problem of, is there enough resource to respond to Iran? But is there the bandwidth to deliver the stability that's needed, both domestically? Remember, this is a president that's under a lot of pressure at home. He's being pushed by Republicans, certainly in the House, to take a much stronger response. But he is a president who, by instinct, by history, by experience, really thinks about the need to exercise restraint. The problem here, of course, is that broader objective of stability is very difficult to achieve absent some sort of resolution to the war between Israel and Hamas. That's the real problem. Without that resolution, without some sense of a path towards a two-state solution, something that seems very far off in the distant future, it's hard to see how you get Iran to bring the temperature down, even with a harder response. Those things are fundamentally linked.
Do you think there's anything that the White House and actually Antony Blinken can do now, the Secretary of State, to try and de-escalate Hamas and Israel and certainly try to limit the casualties in Gaza so that the world doesn't turn against them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real question, for many people is to see whether or not the Biden administration will take clearer steps, harder measures to calling Israel to exercise restraint, whether it's supporting a ceasefire at the UN or, more importantly, holding back on delivering that military assistance to Israel, which, has been in steady supply. Very difficult for this president to do, a tough decision. There's a lot of pressure, not only globally on him to do that, but within the United States. But so far, we haven't seen that movement. We, of course, don't know what's being said behind the scenes. And we know that there's been a very concerted, very serious effort at diplomacy across multiple individuals, Blinken, Burns, of course. So I think we're waiting to see whether the U.S. will make that call. But even if it does, it's not obvious that Israel will then won't continue its campaign.
And Tina, you were mentioning the fact that markets are largely they're not taking notice, is that they just don't know what to do with it because I guess the probability of this escalating is just so awful that they don't really know what scenarios they're looking at. Is that fair, or am I being too kind to markets?
I don't think market participants think that the probability of escalation is high, and I'll tell you why. Traders, at least, tend to take a pretty instrumental view of foreign policy, and there are two factors at play. One is that there's ample supply, and no one expects a confrontation that would interrupt gas supplies, right? And the other point is they look at upcoming U.S. elections and think Biden won't do anything that will drive up oil prices. On this, I think that they are far too complacent, and I've reinforced that message because once the genie is out of the bottle, and it definitely is, it's very difficult to sort of monitor and contain these responses.
But does Iran want to get more involved? I mean, it's unclear, actually, to me, what Iran is playing at right now.
So we tend to over-interpret strategy. This is an excellent time when there's a conflict in the Middle East, very unpopular Israeli operations in Gaza. Excellent time. We're seeing this with the Houthis, obviously, with the Iran-backed militias in Iraq, which are the ones that undertook this attack. Great time to gain advantage, to undermine U.S. and allied positions, and to claim they're doing this in response to the attacks on Gaza. This is not an environment that lends itself to de-escalation, which is why I think we should be preparing for more and not less.
I mean, does the America? We're in an election year, so I think everything is probably through that lens, right?
Yeah.
Does the U.S. voter vote on this? Like when they tick the box on who their president is, do they think about foreign policy?
We know that they don't. We know that domestic concerns will matter. It's the economy. It's, your particular experience of inflation or the basket of goods that you are, spending your money on. Is it coming down? However, and it's very hard to get at this in polling, but there's no doubt that that sense of stability affects how people vote. They might, if you run your data, it matter, it's the price of gas or it's the price of groceries, price of your mortgage. But of course, hovering in the background is, do I live in a stable country? Do I live in a stable world? Is the rule of law operating? It filters through. And I think, this president knows that. Donald Trump, interestingly, has sort of played off of the disruption. It's almost like he sort of rejects the idea that people like that basis of stability and that they like a sense of drama and disruption. But I think we don't have the measure for it, but it's certainly there.
I mean, I know we're like January 31st, so it's early days and anything can happen, but is there any, chance that Donald Trump is not the Republican nominee?
There's certainly a chance that, it's a very long time before the party conferences and the elections. I think that, Haley right now looks like she's sort of casting a spotlight on the fact that Trump's numbers aren't what they should be for somebody who is in effect, the incumbent of the Republican Party. The fact that he's not getting much over 50% of the vote in a Republican caucus and primary is not a great sign for him. He probably will get the nomination. We certainly don't want to, influence the elections by preempting the outcome. Anything could happen. But even if he gets the nomination, this is a man who has, as we know, 91 criminal charges, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of personal volatility. And so, where we land in November is very, very far from certain, let alone what the outcome of the election is.
And Tina, I mean, I guess if you look, I think there's like 50% of world GDP going to the vote. The U.S. is probably the one where repercussions will be felt most around the world. But actually, there are other big countries, right, that could change the way we look at 2025.
Yes, with so many elections happening, yay democracy, that should be something that is welcomed. But there are geostrategic elections, like we saw in Taiwan, for example. Still waiting to see how Beijing responds to that outcome. The elections in Russia aren't real elections, but they do matter for President Putin. There are big economies going to vote, like India. Almost no chance of a change in power, but what does Modi do with a reinforced mandate? Indonesia, also a big powerhouse. South Africa, where pre-election politics arguably played into its decision to take that case to the ICJ. So there's no uniform trend in global elections. But at the moment, if when I look at the analysis, most people are just saying, gosh, there are lots of elections and lots of potential for volatility. How do people vote in the first big cycle post-COVID in light of inflation? As Leslie said, people's personal kind of experience of the economy. Yes, it's in America, it's about gas prices, but also it's very much filtered through their lens of their political tribe, as it were. And of course, we have European parliamentary elections. maybe the most boring elections this year, apart from UK elections, which personally I'm grateful that our elections are likely to be, a bit short on drama. But European parliamentary elections will set the stage for the sort of the next set of actors, and we'll see how European populism plays out.
I like that. Short of drama is kind of like a sweet spot, I think, if you're a geopolitical analyst. Very quickly, Leslie, if Donald Trump becomes president, what does he do? I mean, the biggest foreign policy change would be what his take on Taiwan, or?
I think that, there's two things really, and I do. We want to talk about foreign policy, but the reality is this is a president who will have the most significant impact if he's reelected on America's democracy, and we need to look no further than Project 2025, Schedule F, and the big plan, which is to take what he sees as the deep state, the permanent, the civil servants, and turn them into temporary employees that basically serve at the will of the president. That's a radical shift for America's democracy, and that's really where the game is. He's also somebody who we know doesn't believe in multilateralism, really has disdain for some of America's closest partners and allies. And so I think that question, for Europe especially, what happens to America's commitment to Ukraine, something that will be, a question regardless, but a much more significant question. What happens to the U.S. enthusiasm for Vladimir Putin, that will, increase dramatically if President Trump were to be reelected. And what happens to America's commitment more generally to Europe's security? Those are really big questions. And remember, we have an election here in the UK. That's going to be very significant. The proximity of the U.S. election to the UK election is, arguably one of the most interesting and, again, hard to quantify things. But there won't be, we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world where people watch their television screens. And they'll be looking to see, which one comes first, and what is the impact of perhaps a Labour government and a re-election of President Biden. We shall see.
Still with us, Fordham from Fordham Global Foresight and Leslie Vinjamuri from Chatham House. Leslie, I was in Davos, and actually, so President Zelensky showed up, and he was in the corridors, and there was something a little bit sad in the fact that they really felt the need that they needed to, show up, speak to investors, speak to the media to make sure that Ukraine was not forgotten. Is there a real danger that it's starting to be forgotten because of money and because of political will?
Well, and because of the war in the Middle East. As you well know, to be very clear, this is since October 7th, the world's attention kind of moved further east, necessarily. And there is a thing, in any major conflict that the longer it goes on without any sense of a clear resolution, most especially on the ground, that you lose a little bit of that sense of urgency. You certainly lose public opinion and public support. And right now we're in a context where we're losing the domestic electorate because of the shenanigans of a small number of, far-right radical Republicans in the House that are capturing what is otherwise actually broad support across the Senate and the House for supporting Ukraine. And that is actually, in a U.S. context, making it very difficult. We're seeing that this bill that's supposed to link border security support for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan is not getting traction. It's made worse by the New Hampshire result because Donald Trump is in the background saying, actually, I don't want border security because I want the border to be bad because that plays to my favor and it undermines support for President Biden. So the domestic politics are very small in the U.S. They're pulling, I think, that focus away from a really urgent moment, clearly for Ukrainians, and let's be honest, for all of Europe, and eventually for the United States too. If it doesn't, if we don't support Ukraine, if there's not some sort of stability in the region, then this is going to affect clearly everybody.
Tina, we also have this EU special summit tomorrow, and this is about basically the EU trying to get Viktor Orban on side with a number of things that they will propose. Do you think they'll manage?
Viktor Orban will play this for as much as he can get. I think Viktor Orban and Tayyip Erdogan are both very skilled at this kind of horse trading. The pressure on Orban is getting higher than it has been in the past, but Orban has been the sole holdout in increasing EU aid and support, Slovakia as well, I guess, to Ukraine. But when you take the European dynamics and put them next to the U.S. political dynamics, what you see is a lot of political actors pretty cynically using the war in Ukraine for their own short-term benefit. And, you could argue that's politics as usual, but it's not in the self-interest of either the European Union or the United States to allow, the invasion of sovereign countries and the seizure of territory in a world where 85% of conflicts are over territory.
Yeah, so where does this end? How long is this just a war of attrition, and are we stuck like this for years, or does it change?
Let's put it this way. We've talked about the Middle East, we're talking about Ukraine, we've talked about U.S. elections. Why would Netanyahu listen to the Biden administration if he thinks that Trump is going to be back in the White House? And likewise, why would Putin make any meaningful concessions on a diplomatic agreement if he thinks there's a chance that he'll be dealing with Trump again? And that's where, even though Americans haven't historically voted on foreign policy, this simple signpost of U.S. elections in November is weighing on all of these decisions.